The 1783 Treaty of Paris, sometimes known as the Definitive Treaty of Peace, is a treaty between two warring parties shortly following what is known as the American Revolutionary War. It consists of a preamble followed by 10 articles and concluding with the signatures of the 4 plenipotentiaries authorized to represent the two parties, that is, of Great Britain and the United States of America. One will notice that the preamble is one sentence of over 430 words with many obfuscating parenthetical phrases scattered throughout. This essay will examine the structure of this preamble, presenting it so that it makes perfect sense, as well as examining the first portion to better understand what is being said and what is not. The following is the preamble laid out in an outline format to reveal the structure. 99% of the words and punctuation are as original as can be discerned, as all of the various copies and transcripts have a few slight variances. The very few clarifying additions are in red, and some of the superfluous parenthetical phrases are in blue and can be skipped over in reading for clarity. The first 2 bullet points, 1 and 2, shall be examined later. Here are the highlights of this outline, very loosely paraphrasing. It having pleased the divine providence to dispose of the hearts of some folks, to establish beneficial and satisfactory intercourse, discussion, communication, and having already laid the foundation of this peace treaty last year. So therefore, let's get on with it. Britain and America have appointed these 4 chaps. David Hartley for Britain, and for the United States, John Adams, Ben Franklin, and John Jay, all of them Esquires. They are to be plenipotentiaries for knocking this thing out. The first 2 bullet points shall be more closely examined as we continue. The rest of this essay is going to focus on 2 aspects. 1, the question of George III being the Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector of the United States of America. And 2, what's this King of France stuff? While this outline format makes the entire preamble much more understandable, the first bit is still a bit convoluted. Here is the preamble's opening first clause, points 1 and 2. Let's condense this to what we sussed out in the outline. It having pleased the divine providence to dispose the hearts of all parties involved, to forget all past misunderstandings and differences, and to establish a beneficial and satisfactory intercourse between the two countries upon the ground of reciprocal advantages and mutual conveyance as may promote and secure to both perpetual peace and harmony. It is beneficial to note here that it is referring to hearts, plural, not just one heart. This hearts, plural, was noted in a Gemstone University video as, quote, interesting as a plural, end quote, but with no follow-up explanation. Thanks to the outline above, it should now be plain that it is referring to the hearts of the two countries, that is, the parties involved. Taking a look at this section from another angle, one should be able to clearly see who the parties are and see with a fair degree of accuracy what is being said and what is not. To effectively do this, it's very helpful to understand the role and function of a grammatical tool referred to as a parenthesis anytime one runs into a long run-on sentence. A parenthesis, also known as a parenthetical phrase, is a clause, phrase, or word which is inserted, usually for explanation or amplification, into a passage which is already grammatically complete, and usually marked off with brackets, commas, or dashes. Since these parentheses are extraneous and possibly helpful text, one can just cross out the parts that do not really add meaning to the sentence, being sure to retain grammatical correctness. For example, if one crossed out the first parenthesis, by the grace of God, the grammar and meaning of the sentence do not change one bit. Continuing this crossing out exercise will help to suss out what is being said, starting with most of the superfluous self-aggrandizing appellations. The most serene and most potent prince, King of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, Defender of the Faith, Duke of Brunswick and Lüneburg. This condenses down to, it having pleased the divine providence to dispose the hearts of George III, Arch-Treasurer and Prince Elector of the Holy Roman Empire, etc., and of the United States of America, to forget all past misunderstandings, ... Remember, these additional inserts or parentheses are marked off with commas. By crossing out the parts between parenthetical commas, one is able to reduce very clumsy sentences to their essence. To continue, cross out the Arch-Treasurer descriptor section, marked off with commas, that begins with comma arch and ends with etc. comma. This leaves, it having pleased the divine providence to dispose the hearts of George III and of the United States of America to forget all past misunderstandings, ... This boiled down version makes it clearer to what it is really speaking. While some may argue that Prince George did not have any heart, it's probably safe to presume he did not have more than one. This is referring to the hearts of two entities, that of George III and that of the United States of America, the parties of this treaty. It is the hearts of these two entities that are disposed to forget all the past misunderstandings and differences and to establish a perpetual peace and harmony between them, notwithstanding the bait-and-switch sleight-of-hand tactics of the treaty really just securing the interests of the crown. The last title of Prince George is of special interest. The Arch-Treasurer and Prince Elector of the Holy Roman Empire. This will take some explaining, so please bear with the following. Some type of election generally occurred for the king of the German and Frankish areas or Central Europe in the Middle Ages. To be considered Emperor of the Romans, a king generally needed to be coronated by the Pope. Charlemagne is considered the first of the Frankish kings to be Emperor of the Romans back in 800. 150 years or so later, beginning with Otto the Great in 962, often considered the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire. The elected king was usually a son of some previous emperor. Of the next 12 emperors up to 1250, only 2 were either a nephew or cousin. In fact, Frederick II in 1250 was a 9 times great-grandson of Otto the Great. By 1356, a collection of electors and many princes issued the Golden Bull, which codified the emperor election process by defining a small group of 7 electors to elect each emperor, consisting of 3 spiritual electors, all archbishops, and 4 secular electors, rulers of 4 specific locales. These electors were considered a member of the imperial household, and each held a high office styled as Arch XXX, with particular duties. As is par for the course with all the self-aggrandizing, generally meaningless pomp and ceremony, the titles were of purely ceremonial significance, but they meant a great deal to the electors nonetheless, since they appeared in these ceremonial capacities at imperial coronations. The only job that the electors did after voting was to discharge their ceremonial duties associated with their arch offices during coronations only. Any other imperial duties were the responsibility of the corresponding non-arch offices. A couple hundred years down the road, in 1623, Emperor Ferdinand II transferred Palatine's electorate and office to Bavaria, leaving Palatine with no titles. In 1648, Emperor Ferdinand III favored Charles Louis of Palatine after the 30 Years' War, regranting to Palatine the title Elector, becoming the 8th Elector. As well, a new office was created and assigned to Palatine, Arch-Treasurer. This is an imperial ceremonial office. The non-arch office treasurer was the Count of Zinzendorf. In 1654, Count Georg Ludwig von Zinzendorf was enfeoffed with the hereditary office of Treasurer of the Holy Roman Emperor. Later in 1692, Emperor Leopold I of the House of Habsburg created a ninth electorate, the Electorate of Hanover, formerly known as the Electorate of Brunswick-Lüneburg. The official title given to this position was Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg and Elector of the Holy Roman Empire, with the first holder of this position being Duke Ernest Augustus. Due to some unsettled matters with Bavaria, the office of Arch-Treasurer was soon transferred to Hanover as well. 6 years later, Duke Ernest died, leaving the dukedom and elector statuses to his son Georg Ludwig, also known as George Louis, in 1698. It so happened that George's mother, Sophia, was the daughter of Anne, Queen of Great Britain. In 1714, Sophia died as well as Anne, leaving George to be the closest living Protestant relative in line of succession. George then, taking his Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg and Elector of the Holy Roman Empire titles with him, marched on over to Britain to be King George I, adding a few more titles to his name. Oh my, that's starting to look familiar, hey? Well, after George came George II. After him came George III, the subject king of this Treaty of Paris, 1783. He inherited all these titles. Another matter to consider for a more accurate understanding of this section is to consider the context of how George III regularly styled his titles. Regarding internal British matters, King George styled himself officially as George III, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, Defender of the Faith, and so forth. Since he also held titles in Germany, when there he was styled Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg, Arch-Treasurer, and Prince-Elector of the Holy Roman Empire. So it is completely expected to see George III style himself in this 1783 treaty with the United States of America with that full-length title. This treaty was signed on September 3rd, 1783, a date referred to as the Peace of Paris, due to Britain signing peace treaties also with France and Spain that same day. All three treaties are structured very similarly, and especially in how George titles himself, and the latter part being the most serene and most potent Prince Louis XVI, and the most serene and most potent Prince Charles III. A few months later, with the Netherlands, notice the two periods after the etc. Another treaty to compare is the Treaty of Paris 1763, 20 years earlier. This was establishing peace after the 7 Years' War, where, among many factors, Britain and France were battling for North American supremacy. Pretty much the same. Earlier examples. One with Russia, and a couple with Tunis and Tripoli. This one is cute with all the etceteras at the end. It may also be beneficial to examine the term etc. Etc. comes in several abbreviated forms, etc, ampersand c, and c, period. And it means, and so forth. As we've even seen George III use those words regarding internal British matters. So in this case, it's set up as Prince George III, descriptor 1, descriptor 2, 3, 4, descriptor 5, ampersand c, etc. What is not possible is for it to be Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector of the Holy Roman Empire and or other entities. The role of elector is to elect the Holy Roman Emperor. One cannot elect a Holy Roman Emperor to an individual, such as the King of France, or Spain, or the Princess of Russia. nor to any other country such as the United States. Nor can you perform those ceremonial duties of the arch-treasurer of this said hypothetical emperor. One needn't, though, get too hung up on comma placement around the etc., as copies, duplicates, copies of duplicates, and accompanying transcripts show a variety of comma placement to be before, after, or none at all. To summarize all of the above, we can present this first clause in outline form as follows. It having pleased the divine providence to dispose the hearts of George III, blah, 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 and of the United States of America to forget all past misunderstandings and differences, blah, 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 and to establish such a beneficial and satisfactory intercourse, blah, 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 and having for this desirable end already laid the foundation last year of the peace treaty, blah, blah, blah. A common interpretation teaching is that Prince George III, while being identified as many things such as King of several areas, Duke of a couple of others, is identified as the Prince Elector and Arch-Treasurer of the Holy Roman Empire and the United States of America. In a marked up version of the treaty text, an argument was put forth supporting this interpretation. It reads, look at the words, quote, etc., comma, and, end quote, in the opening paragraph. And is a word that joins, not a word that separates. If the comma were not present, it is possible that the word could be taken as being a treaty between the king and the United States. Because the word between is not used before the word and, then Prince George III is declared to be the King of the United States of America also. Compare this with the straightforwardness of between Great Britain and France that is written below that phrase. Well, it is correct that the word and is a joining word, but the presumption above is that the subject of the word surrounding and is the treaty, whereas we have determined above that the subject is the hearts of George and the United States. Treaty does not become the subject until the third point, as seen in the outlines above. To conclude this section, based on outlining and examining grammar, we learned that this treaty says, this divine providence did some things. It pricked the hearts of the parties to forget past nonsense, to establish satisfactory communications among themselves, and having laid a foundation in the previous year, let's get constituting this treaty of peace between Great Britain and the United States. And here are 4 authorized representatives to sign this definitive treaty, as the subsequent 10 articles delineate. As to what it does not say, based on 1. The sentence structure taking out the parentheses, 2. Learning what Prince Electors and Arch-Treasurers were, 3. The ways that George III always styled himself, and 4. George's exact same titles used in the treaties with France and Spain the very same day along with earlier treaties, we've seen that this treaty is not identifying George as being Arch-Treasurer and Prince Elector of the United States of America, nor king thereof. So, what's this King of France stuff? So why is George III, King of England, styling himself as the King of France? To understand the context of this claim, one needs to understand the confluence of several factors, some going back at least 6 centuries. For many centuries, various English lords and kings held various territories in France, often known as duchies. With respect to holding the title of Duke, they were vassals to the French king. These territories waxed and waned through the years, sometimes covering over half of France. As the duchies were territories within the Kingdom of France, these dukes were to pay homage to the king for this privilege of being a feudal lord of France. Through all the various intermarrying that the nobility did, matters get quite convoluted regarding all the alliances, treaties, and politics of the day. The primary areas of France are Normandy, Gascony, Brittany, Aquitaine. Eventually, a young heir to the English throne, one Henry Plantagenet, Married in 1152, the Duchess of Aquitaine, becoming the Duke of Aquitaine. Henry had already been given the dukedom of Normandy a couple years earlier and did homage for that the following year. Once Henry was king in 1154, the duchy merged with the English crown. He eventually did homage for his French lands shortly before his death in 1189. The system, although occasionally not without some problems, worked generally well for the next century, as each of the next four kings paid their due homage for the title of Duke in French territory. Of Richard in 1188, John around 1200, Henry III in 1259, and in 1286, Edward I, after receiving expanded territory of Gascony, paid homage as vassal. In the early 1290s, though, bigger squabbles were occurring between Edward I and Philip IV, and by 1294, Philip confiscated Aquitaine from Edward, resulting in war. The resulting treaty to this 1294 to 1303 Anglo-French War was that Aquitaine was restored to Edward II as vassal. A very critical point in this story is that Philip's daughter Isabella, then 7, was to marry Edward's son, Edward II. This set the stage for Isabella's son, the next king of England, to have claim to the French throne. Well, Isabella was not good for England. She did not really like her husband. She had designs on the English throne herself, and she was rather manipulative. After 2 decades, due to the efforts of Isabella and her future lover, Mortimer, the English territories in France shrunk. In 1324, the French king Charles IV invaded Aquitaine. Once again, an agreement the next year settled matters with restoring English lands, and Edward II sending his 12-year-old son Edward III to join his mother in France and do homage by proxy. During the next year, 1326, Isabella betrothed Edward to a Philippa of Hainaut for a sizable dowry, which she then used to hire a small army to invade England and overthrow her husband. This venture proved successful. In 1327, Edward II abdicated to his son Edward III at age 14. Isabella and Mortimer ruled the country through tight control of her son. Just 1 year later in France, the last of Philip IV's sons died without an heir, creating a bit of a succession crisis. Edward III, King of England, aged 15 now, had the most direct claim to the French crown. Isabella pressed the issue, but the French nobility emphatically declined and opted for the next in line, Philip VI of Valois. After months of Isabella's objections, King Edward III traveled to France and paid homage to King Philip VI, recognizing him as rightful heir. Less than a decade later, Edward was harboring an enemy of King Philip, which Philip used as the excuse of Edward being in breach of his vassal obligations, so once again he invaded and confiscated the Duchy of Aquitaine in 1337. This prompted Edward to prep for war and once again press hard for his rightful place as King of France. Then was also when he started referring to himself as King of France, as a matter of pretense, even though he had officially recognized Philip as rightful king just 8 years prior. It is a pretense, as it is just a claim, maybe rightly so, but nonetheless just a claim. He was never accepted, approved, and coronated as king. This was the beginning of the 100 Years' War. By 1340, Edward officially styled himself as King of England and of France and Lord of Ireland. The first round of the war lasted 23 years, ending with the Treaty of Bretagne. One of the stipulations was that Edward renounce his claim to the French crown, which he did. Of course, once hostilities flared up 9 years later, Edward resumed his claim and pretentious title. For the next 450 years, every king and queen of England, 22 of them, styled themselves as being king or queen of France, including George III. He actually ended up being the last English monarch to do so, as the French monarchy was abolished during his reign with the French Revolution. There was one almost got it moment near the end of Charles VI's reign in France. In the midst of the 100 Years' War, matters were not going well for France. Henry V and the English were at their zenith of their French invasion. Known for his mental illness and psychotic episodes, with his back up against a wall, Charles signed the Treaty of Troyes in 1420 that was not favorable to France. He was to disinherit his 17-year-old son Charles. And moreover, it named Henry V and his heirs as King of France upon Charles's death. In 1422, Henry died 2 months before Charles, leaving his only child, Henry VI, not even 1 year old, to be King of England and of France. The map to the right shows the zenith of English incursion into France by the time Henry VI became King of France, the red area. England was also allied with Burgundy, the purple. Charles VII ruled France, the blue area, so the country was actually split. During the next 20 years, highlighted by the inspiration of Joan of Arc, and with Burgundy changing sides, Charles pushed England out of France by 1453 with the final Battle of Castillon, thereby reclaiming all of France and concluding the 100 Years' War hostilities. The Treaty of Troyes from 30 years earlier became regarded as invalid on grounds of coercion, duress, and Charles VI's diminished mental capacity. Interestingly, Henry VI is officially recognized as one of the disputed kings of France to this day. As the treaty was made with Henry V and his heirs, it's a moot point outside of Henry VI, his only heir. Edward was killed during England's civil wars 18 years after being expelled from France. This pretension was clearly recognized by all parties present at Paris in 1783, when the treaties were signed. In both treaties signed with France and Spain, the first separate article signed and appended to each treaty reads as follows. Some of the titles made use of by contracting powers, not being generally acknowledged, it has been agreed that no prejudice shall ever result therefrom to either of the said contracting parties, and that the titles taken or omitted on either side, upon occasion of the said negotiation and of the present treaty, shall not be cited or quoted as a precedent. This is not a unique occasion either. 20 years earlier, in the Treaty of Paris, 1763, an almost verbatim disclaimer article was appended to that one as well. In other words, when King George III claimed to be King of France, everybody knew the King of Great Britain was full of it. In 1328 and afterwards, Edward III was never accepted, approved, or coronated as king. None of the 22 subsequent kings, queens were ever king or queen of France based on Edward's pretense. Henry VI in 1422 was a disputed king based on his own lineage through his mother, but his line was short-lived and died out quickly. If Edward's pretension is accurate, then King George was the creditor of the 18 million livre loan, that debt instrument from France to the USA, thereby playing both ends against the middle. Since Edward's pretension is not accurate nor based in reality, King George could not be said creditor based on this claim as written in the treaty. In connection, it is also thought that the Arch-Treasurer is in office in the city of London. We have seen through many resources that the Arch-Treasurer was in Holy Roman Empire office connected to the Elector of Hanover. The Elector's sole purpose was to elect the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Arch-Treasurer was just a ceremonial office during coronations with big-sounding name. That whole system dissolved when the Holy Roman Empire was dismantled during the Napoleonic Wars, when Emperor Francis II officially dissolved the empire in 1806. It is commonly understood that it is the bankers, not some pretentious king, that loans money to both sides of a war. With the banking sector in the City of London that is separate from the monarchy, it is a bit untenable to consider that it was King George who was in control of all the purse strings. Being able to put the Treaty of Paris 1783 preamble in an outline form makes it really clear what it says and what it does not say. The hearts of both King George and the United States of America were pricked to do three things. 1, to forget all the bad stuff. 2, to communicate well. And 3, to establish and constitute a treaty of peace with duly appointed representatives. It does not say that King George III was indeed the King of France, only that he claims that. Nor does it say that he is the Prince Elector and Arch-Treasurer of the United States of America. Please consider carefully what this presentation says and what it does not say. All it says is that the 1783 Treaty of Paris does not say that King George III was the Arch-Treasurer and Prince Elector of the United States. He may indeed have been, and if so, other evidence needs to show that. In addition, if he was indeed the King of France, other evidence needs to be brought forth as well. Kings making pretentious statements do not necessarily make it so. As we all know, everything that comes out of the mouths of government officials may or may not be so, and is propaganda intended for public consumption and manipulation. Centuries later, we ought not fall for it either.